this is so far from the idea of a genuinely secular state where you're going to have vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. That simply is not how we structured our society from its founding. That secularism has worked its way in, and now we think that that's the normal kind of thing. How has the triune God told the civil magistrates to operate? Where are the limits of their authority? What kind of laws should they be establishing? How much of that revelation that they're attending to is explicitly biblical? And how much of that is general revelation, what he's spoken to us in creation, that kind of thing? Yes, the First Amendment, I think it's clear to look at the First Amendment and go, this is not saying that our nation is supposed to be secular. You are certainly free at a national level to have a broad, general, public, civic acknowledgement that Christ is Lord.
All right, and Bennett says that we are live, so welcome back to On the Line, and today we get to sit down with, is it Dr. Jared?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, Dr. Jared Longshore.
Yeah.
And got a lot of fun things to talk about. So one thing that a lot of people have emailed me about, and they've said, hey, can we get a proper understanding of how, as Christians or how as the church, how do we deal with the politic, or the political realm, the world around us? And this is something that you've done a good amount of work on, and I think you've wrestled with a lot of this. So we're going to really kind of get into that thrust, also deal with how we can courageously kind of, engage the culture around us from a Christian perspective. But if you just want to kind of introduce us, if you were going to go about these topics, what's kind of a good framework, kind of a philosophy, or, how do we start to look at this?
Yeah. I mean, we're Americans. I don't know if most of our listeners will be from the States, but I think grounding the whole political conversation in the history of the United States of America is helpful. It's not the only thing to do, but if you can start there, you can basically say 8 of the 13 colonies had established churches. And of course, those establishments faded probably over like a 50-year period when the nation was founded. But established churches would be, of course, colonies or states that actually have a distinct denomination enshrined as the denomination of the given region. Or it could involve religious tests for office or something of that nature, particularly incentivizing not only the Christian faith broadly conceived, but a particular, in the American context, a particular Protestant denomination. Now that's, if you go there, you at least say, the idea of a secular state is something that's new. And when I'm reasoning, particularly with secularists about this topic, just pointing out that their position is the new one and our position is not the new one, is that's a good footing to start having the conversation. So if you were going to come at it abstractly, you'd say something like, well, there is a God over the state. You can go to Romans 13 with all of the COVID nonsense that happened. Say the Christian church in America kind of had its eyes open to the fact that civil magistrates shouldn't just be doing whatever it is that they want to do, but they actually have a God above them. There's a king above them. That king has legislated and spoken to them about how they're supposed to operate in their particular office. So he set the parameters for what that is supposed to look like. So getting rid of the idea of a secular state is the foundational thing. I think coming at it historically is just a good approach to help people say, okay, there have not only have there been states in the past that have done so, not only is this an abstract concept, but we can ground it in our own history and our own traditions. And you can riff off of that and say, wherever you are with an established church, America was, and I want to claim, is still to some degree a Protestant Christian nation. Has been. You have Holy Trinity versus the United States, the Supreme Court decision that spoke of our nation as a explicitly Christian nation. I mean, even on our money, on our buildings, you can look at all of those places and say, this is very clear what we were. 50 of the 55 men at the Constitutional Convention were Orthodox Christians. The ones who were not, the ones who were deists were really bad deists. You could go Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, kind of the two hallmark deists everybody talks about. There was a proposal for a national seal, and Franklin and Jefferson both proposed a seal that had Pharaoh and the Egyptian army drowning in the Red Sea, and Moses and Israel standing on the shore with the pillar of fire coming down upon them. And I think around the outside of the seal it said, rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God. And you say, okay, give me the deist. I would be happy to take Jefferson and Franklin.
It'd be a big step in the right direction.
This is so far from the idea of a genuinely secular state where you're going to have vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. That simply is not how we structured our society from its founding. That secularism has worked its way in, and now we think that that's the normal kind of thing. So all that to say, I think dealing with it historically in the American context is a really good setup, and then you're going to have all sorts of questions that arise once you get into the conversation.
Yeah, let's lean especially into Thomas Jefferson. I think that's one that people often go to when they try to make that claim that this separation of church and state, that means that we don't have a religion. There's not supposed to be any kind of religious influence, and certainly that's where secularists go to, and they kind of try to pin it there. Jefferson's their go-to guy, but they'll really say that was kind of built into the ethos as they were crafting the Constitution. So how would you respond to those that kind of push that narrative?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, he's only one of the founding fathers, and so if you isolate and say we're gonna take the two infamous deists and then build everything out from there, I wouldn't accept those terms. So I'd say no. Let's go look back at the whole lot. Like look at all of those founding fathers, and you're going to find the vast majority of them were Christians. It's going to be the first. And then also, of course, the separation of church and state. I believe it was a Danbury Baptist is the church, is the letter in which that statement is found about the separation of church and state,
okay.
the wall of separation. And so it's not, this is a letter that's being written, interestingly being written to or from Baptists. So you have a certain kind of ecclesiology and things that they're thinking about. But it's not as if this was enshrined in our Constitution. It wasn't that kind of situation. And I think it was Jefferson that actually supported funding I think both a church building and a minister, and I can't remember the name of the Indian tribe, but there was some Indian tribe, and they knew they needed religion to be represented, they needed the Christian faith to be represented. I'm almost positive that Jefferson actually signed off on tax money going to support the construction of this, of this chapel, maybe a minister for some time among these particular people. Mm-hmm. So you're at least going to find things historically that say, yes, he was not a Christian. But he was clearly within a Christian context and wasn't abiding by the kind of secularism that secularists are advocating for today, or that a lot of the Christians in our nation have thought was just the way that business is supposed to be done politically, that we can't actually acknowledge God, we can't acknowledge what he's revealed to us.
So is this, I could be wrong on this, I've heard this said before, but I haven't taken the time to really research it and go back to kind of earlier documents, but one of the understandings of this separation of church and state, was it that it was primarily in reaction against what was taking place in Europe, which is where, you're an Anabaptist or you're a Reformed, and all of a sudden the king, marries a Catholic woman, converts to Catholicism, and now your entire region becomes Catholic, and you wake up the next day and you have to be Catholic because that's what your ruling government is. And is it true that that was one of the primary reasons that this conversation was taking place, was they were worried about individuals that cannot practice their actual denominational expression of Christianity because the government's going to decide we are Anabaptist or we are Lutheran, etc. Is that true?
Yes. The First Amendment would be key here. Mm-hmm. So Congress shall pass no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion or establishment of the same. So you have that First Amendment was not employed in the disestablishment of the various colonies. Okay, so you had 8 of the 13 with various kinds of establishment, but all Christian. Mm-hmm. Not only all Christian, all Protestants. You had a bit of Roman Catholicism down in Florida, early on. So a couple things. Number one, when the colonies did go through disestablishment, so they're we're no longer going to have an established church in our particular colony, they weren't using the First Amendment as the proof text for that disestablishment. They just weren't. And you say, why? Well, because the First Amendment, first of all, Congress is the one who can't pass a law. Okay? So it says nothing about what a particular colony or a particular state's going to do. States are free to do so. So, Minnesota, Wyoming, Idaho, it would not be unconstitutional for any of those states to say, we're going to have this particular establishment. We're now going to be Anglican. We're now going to be Presbyterian. We're now going to be Lutheran. Whatever. That move, even today, wouldn't transgress the First Amendment, because the First Amendment says it's Congress that can't do that. And so they're looking at explicitly Protestant Christian colonies that are different forms. As you mentioned, there are different forms, call them different denominations, different branches of the Protestant tradition. And they're saying, if we say at a national level that we are all going to be Anglican now, well, there's going to be a problem there. If you make it at a national level, you're now going to have conflict between these particular Protestant colonies that aren't going to be on board with the broad Anglican approach. So yes, the First Amendment, I think it's clear to look at the First Amendment and go, this is not saying that our nation is supposed to be secular. It's saying, no, you can't have the way that you have an established church at the colony level or at a state level. You cannot do that at a national level. But that it would also be true that means you are certainly free at a national level to have a broad, general, public, civic acknowledgement that Christ is Lord. So we say, in the United States, the Lord Jesus Christ is King. We acknowledge him. He is the one that's above our state. So he's not just above the individual souls of the citizens of this land. He's actually above the entire operation. He's the one who appoints our civil magistrates. So this would be key in Romans 13. Civil magistrates are called deacons of God, ministers of God, those who execute the vengeance of God. And I mean, that's extremely plain. All the Christians should go, well, yes, that's right there in the Bible. It's right there in Romans 13. Now we have to deal with it. Now, if we want to say, yes, that's true, but then this God, this triune God who appointed them to their office, hasn't told them anything about what they're supposed to do. Like, okay, where do you get that idea? That's not, that certainly doesn't map on the way that the Old Testament operated. The king was to meditate upon the law, right? And if you come into the New Testament, you're dealing with a monstrous fracture of the way you're thinking about the living God's dealings with mankind. If you're going to actually run that kind of logic and say, well, yeah, according to Romans 13, he is a servant of the triune God, but then he shouldn't pay attention to what his master tells him. So I usually always say the text of Romans 13 says that they're servants of God. Are servants supposed to obey their masters? Yes, we know that. Now you have to get into the conversation about how has the triune God told the civil magistrates to operate? Like, where are the limits of their authority? What kind of laws should they be establishing? How much of that revelation that they're attending to is explicitly biblical? Right, and how much of that is general revelation, what he's spoken to us in creation, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. So there's certainly a lot of connections you can make there to modern day, and we'll kind of get to that. But I am interested in kind of following the timeline. So I want to get to the timeline. Maybe one more question in this area would be: do you think that the founders, right, and kind of even any of the leaders at this time, is there any notion of America having an ethos that is not Christ-centered? In other words, like, is there a notion that like you could have a bunch of Hindus and a bunch of Muslims and a bunch of secularists, and you could throw them all into Baltimore and be like, all right, this is going to go well?
Yeah, no chance. No chance at all. That's not in their minds. In any form or fashion. So not in the broad swath of things. Now, can you go find like one person that might have said something like that? Well, sure. But not only did you have the whole, the vast majority of the founding fathers were Orthodox Christians, you also have the people themselves. So I would say folks should pick up, did America have a Christian founding? Mark David Hall. That's the guy who wrote the book. Fantastic book, full of sources on this. He's basically just citing examples and giving you, and I can't remember if it was 75%. We're not only Christians, but we're like Reformed Christians of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're just going to go Christian, it's going to run up 90 plus. You're going to have like a very, very small swath of people that we're not.
And are they mostly deists?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
I would assume they deist or Jews. You're probably going to have some mix there. But you're dealing with people that are very used to the fact that that if you're going to hold office in a particular colony or in a particular state, then you're going to have to swear allegiance to, say, the infallibility of the Old and the New Testaments, right? And the Holy Trinity. You're going to have to acknowledge, and you have to remember, it's not like disestablishment just happened in an instant and everyone was a secularist. So it's not the way it worked. I mean, you took about 50 years, and then there's just going to be a slowly peeling back. You can think, well, maybe you don't have to acknowledge the infallibility of the Old and New Testaments, but of course you have to be baptized. So that's now the standard for the next season. It's going to be it's a slow withdrawal of even the established church, which means, to your point, you're dealing with people that are not at all thinking, yeah, we can have a huge swath of Muslims come in or Hindus, and our nation, our states would still operate the way that they're supposed to operate.
So there's a notion where in order to be united, you have to be united underneath something. And once you take that something away, which, for them, and certainly, for us would be, well, it's got to be Christ as Lord. It's got to be God's revelation as revealed in the Old and New Testament. It's got to be kind of the moral structure that God is revealing, which is built into the objective reality of all things, that which is good, true, and beautiful. When that is removed, you're not going to have unity, because you're going to be completely fractured. It's going to be polytheistic in kind of an incarnated sense.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. You could see this in, say, so in the world of Presbyterianism, you have the Old Westminster Confession of Faith, 1646, and then you have the American version of the Westminster Confession of Faith. So that's kind of interesting to study along these lines, because there were changes when it came to the civil magistrate. I think it was 1789, I think. People have to check on that, with the American version, say, of the Westminster Confession of Faith. The 1646, so back in London, the civil magistrate, see, some of the language is, the civil magistrate has the authority to call synods or councils and to punish blasphemy. And to see at the councils that what is conducted there is conducted according to the mind of God. Like very, very strong language. So imagine, this is not claiming that ministers, ecclesiastical ministers, are supposed to be running the state. That's not what I'm advocating for either when I say we need a Christian nation.
Which would be kind of the Catholic approach.
I think that is the Catholic approach. And you see the Protestants working against that, like 17th century. You're seeing Protestants, and basically I think the Westminster is working against that to say, no, they're beefing up that position of the civil office. And they say, no, the civil office is not only calling the Synod, where you're going to have all of your ecclesiastical ministers show up and say, what do we deal with this? What do we do with this troubler of Israel here? Well, here's what we say, comes the ruling. But you have that strong language of, well, the civil magistrate himself, who's not an ecclesiastical minister, of course, is able to determine and to see that what's conducted there is conducted according to the mind of God, and to punish blasphemies, reform abuses in worship, all of that kind of stuff. So it's very strong. The American Westminster doesn't have that language in it, but does talk about the churches of our common Lord, which is clearly talking about, in that situation, the Protestant expression of the Christian faith. And the civil magistrate is to protect those churches, actually has a duty to protect those churches. Now, that's not the point is, the American Westminster is not saying that the civil magistrate just has a duty to protect the church and the Rotary Club and the Islamic mosque from assault and attack. We believe that. I mean, the civil magistrate would have that duty if there was a mosque or a Rotary Club or whatever. They would have the duty to protect them. But that's not what the Westminster's talking about. Even in the American expression of the Westminster Confession, it's still saying, no, the civil magistrate actually has a duty to protect the churches of our common Lord, meaning that this is unapologetically saying that in this land, Christianity will be privileged. Christianity is a religion that I have a duty to protect. All of that is included in the civil realm and the duty of the civil magistrate.
So where do we go from? So you said that was around 1778. You know, so that's, I mean, obviously that's, you know, right around the official founding of America. So where do we go from there to here, and what are some kind of important roadblocks along the way where things start to shift or change? Yeah,
I mean, you see late 19th century. It's very interesting, even the history. Methodists and Baptists, when it came to like going west. So our whole story is like, you know, go west, young man. This is what's going on. And Anglicans, Presbyterians seem to stay home a bit more. They're going to be doing education, that kind of stuff, involved in military. The Methodists and the Baptists pushed hard west, and they were aggressive. So the Methodists, infamous circuit riders that would go, Baptists with kind of evangelism. So as you push west, that's one interesting point about just what's happening with the various branches of the Protestant faith.
And Lutheran farmers kind of bypassed the East and just settled where the mosquitoes are heavy, where it's humid, and where they could farm.
Nice. Yeah. Yes. But you do have kind of secularization, like late 1800s and into the 1900s. You have that going on. Civilly, legally, it's interesting to see what was going on with blasphemy laws. So I think that it's like right around like the 1950s. So all the way up to the 1950s, you have blasphemy laws on the books, and you have the understanding that this is not impinging upon freedom of speech. So you can have free speech and blasphemy laws. So whatever free speech means, it doesn't mean that you can blaspheme the Most High God. Right. And this is not abstract. Again, this is you can actually go back and find the various court documents where even American law, this was established and held that no, we're against blasphemy. This kind of thing is wrong. And that's fading out. I think 1950s might be the last time around that time, which is interesting because you're dealing with, particularly in the 20th century, the civil rights legislation was huge. So what the civil rights legislation did and the way it talked about discrimination, we still get the heebie-jeebies. You know, if you raise a question about the civil rights legislation, you're still going to be in really hot water. But Christopher Caldwell's book, Age of Entitlement, was really good on this and saying this is essentially a new constitution and how we're operating.
Really? Grandiose.
Because you put into... basically, if you say, are you allowed to do damage to someone because that someone is a woman? Because, of course, sex is in there. You shall not discriminate on the basis of religion, race, sex. Well, of course, if discriminate means that I am going to harm this person because she's a woman, or because he's black, or whatever it might be, of course that's out of bounds. But discriminate is the kind of word that carries a lot of weight. What is it? What are we talking about? Am I allowed to distinguish between these two creatures, between a man and a woman? Could I make such a distinction? And around that time, you had the Virginia Military Institute. So when this, I think it was the 65 civil rights legislation that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was later using along with others to get the Virginia Military Institute, which was an institute that trained only men. They're saying, well, now that's discriminatory. You're transgressing our civil rights legislation. You're not allowed to discriminate, and you're discriminating. That's a classic example to go, okay, what do we mean by the law, and how is the law actually functioning? And so Virginia Military Institute actually said, okay, we will make a women's Virginia Military Institute, and we'll make sure that it's really good, you know? And what was the response? No way. We don't want a women's military institute. We want to get into the Virginia Military Institute, which was they talk about, I don't remember what it was called, but they put them through all kinds of what you would expect at a military institute that's training men, just difficult, rough, all that. And so now the Virginia Military Institute doesn't train only men because of that kind of development. So when you're you can do the suffrage movement. So if you go back and deal with women's suffrage, kind of the various waves of feminism, I think that's like another map to see what's happening with the, say, devolving of the distinctly Christian way of approaching our society.
That'd be an interesting one to explore. But kind of real quick, is it a shifting also in the understanding of freedom, in that freedom in the previous sense is still aligned towards an agreed upon good and metric, right? So you're free to do that which is good. You're not free to do that which goes against, let's say, nature or against morality. And then the shift kind of post the 60s is basically freedom can't be, you can't describe any objective thing which freedom has to be oriented towards. It just has to be whatever the person defines. Is that kind of what's going on there as far as the ethos shift?
Yep, absolutely. Freedom to do whatever it is that I want to do. Which is why for freedom of speech, how can freedom of, in that paradigm, how can freedom of speech not be impinged by blasphemy law? If my definition of freedom is freedom to do whatever I want, and when applied to speech, freedom to say whatever I want, and if I can't blaspheme, then I clearly can't have freedom of speech. So that would be a classic example of how this structure, the definition being basically freedom to do whatever you want to do, where the older definition would be freedom from our baser passions, freedom unto self-government, something like that. And if you're going to go scripture, in the Old Testament, it's freedom from tyranny. So Pharaoh would be like the clearest example of that. But hierarchy is not tyranny. You live in a world of hierarchy. I remember I grew up in I went to government schools growing up, and this was just kind of infused into the way that we were taught. You know what I mean? Like, you are an individual, and you basically no one can tell you what to do. You know what I mean? And this is the essence of what it means to be a free person. And I remember always being like, it sounds great, but this isn't my life. Everywhere I go, people are telling me what to do. Like, dad and mom are telling me what to do, when to do it. The teacher's telling me when I have to sit down and stand up. And I remember it really, but that was the government, the subtext of everything taught was that, real freedom entailed that kind of liberty. So yes, in the New Testament, freedom is freedom from sin, freedom from which could be applied. You could use it as freedom from our baser passions.
Well, in Exodus, there is kind of that notion of there's the physical slavery where Pharaoh is the taskmaster and he physically forces you to do things. But then there's the deeper narrative of Exodus where it's like, well, are they free once they cross the Red Sea? And the answer is like, well, no, not really. Like, they have to get to the promised land. And before they can do that, they need to understand the Ten Commandments, right? So there has to become this also spiritual slavery where sin can own you, it can enslave you, and true freedom is going to be being released by that, which happens fully, of course, in Christ and the biblical narrative. But even in the Old Testament, it's like, well, now you have to understand how to structure your society, because if you don't, you're not going to be free just because you don't live in Egypt.
Yeah. I mean, your point about freedom from sin means to be a slave to righteousness. Freedom from Pharaoh means you're a slave and servant faithful to Yahweh, and that is essential to the definition of what freedom is.
Yeah, you're owned by something.
So who was it? It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to serve somebody. Okay, the wisdom. I don't know if was it Dylan. At any rate, this is the hallmark of the way the world works. And we have gotten rid of that notion. I was in, here's a controversial take. So I was in, first you got Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. You say, what in the world? Like, where did we get this idea? To talk Protestant political theory, the hallmark of you had the divine right of kings, which is problematic. Like, we don't want to do that. Just, oldest son or whoever gets to be the next king. So if you're for some kind of consent of the governed idea, can that be represented in this Christian nation that you're talking about? And the answer is, yes, what Protestant political theory essentially says, God does make the king, which is what the divine right of king guys were saying. God makes the king. Okay, but Protestant political theory says God makes the king through the people, and the key is looking at David. So David is anointed by Samuel to be king, but then he's made king at Hebron. So he's anointed by God. This is signaling the vertical line. But you also have the people gather and they make him king. Okay? So you have God making the king through the people. And the divine right of kings is wrong because it's just God makes the king. No, nothing going with the people. But what we're dealing with is Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We've erased the vertical line entirely. We just think it's totally up. It's all about the people. So we are government by the people, for the people, but no reference to deity. And this gets strange. So here's the controversial take. I was in Washington, D.C. doing our first service for Christ Church, D.C., and had my daughter with me, and we went to the Lincoln Memorial. So you go to the Lincoln Memorial, and this would be certainly where if you get past all of the chattel slavery was wrong, man stealing is out, and the racism was really a thing. So let's do all that and say, as a nation, the centralizing thing that happened with the Civil War is significant. Some people would say that's really when we became a nation, because before that you had people. I think Robert E. Lee called Virginia his country. You know, like you had a very strong idea, particularly in the South, of where their allegiances were first and foremost, and then we entered into this, constitutional arrangement. But all that to say, at the Lincoln Memorial, you walk up and Lincoln's sitting on a throne. That's big. First is like, okay, America throne. There you go. And above him it says, "In this temple." And I think the rest of the line is the spirit of Abraham Lincoln, or the memory of Abraham Lincoln, will live on for eternity. You're like, temples? I thought, temples. That's where gods dwell. That's I didn't know we went full Roman, full Greek on this notion. But I point that out to say this: we really have, as a nation, forgotten that God governs the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he pleases. And if you don't acknowledge him, say this is like an inescapable concept. I'm not recommending even a way that a nation could work, right? You could have a secular version, or maybe you should try this Christian thing I'm talking about. No, I'm just saying this is like how they all work. You live in the world of solids and gods. You live in a world where there are heavenly beings that are involved in the arrangement of civil affairs. Go to the book of Daniel, Prince of Persia stuff, right? You have all that going on. And I'm telling you, it's really, really bad for us if you don't acknowledge him and what you're doing, if you do not honor him. Righteousness exalts a nation, and sin is a reproach to any people. But righteousness really does exalt a nation, right? And that's not merely a matter of like social reform. There's that piece too. You become a more moral people, but you actually acknowledge this God who is over us, and there's corresponding blessing with doing that at a national level. But go the other route and dishonor him and start talking Vox Populi, Vox Dei, it's going to be a Nebuchadnezzar situation.
So back to the women's suffrage. How does that kind of add here to the puzzle?
Yeah, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I don't remember if this is like, I think it's cooking in the late 1800s. Established by the 1920s. I think somewhere around there. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is somewhere around there. And she was first wave of feminism, women's suffrage, second wave of feminism, say 1960s, tied with the sexual revolution. Some would talk about a third wave of feminism in the modern era, tied up to LGBTQ and whatnot. And that's all adapting and changing because of the feminists being at war with the transgenders over female sports. Go back to the first. Elizabeth Cady Stanton kind of infamously said, the Christian religion, I almost have her verbatim. I've read this quote so many times. The Christian religion is founded upon the woman's deception and the man's fall. But if we can buy into the Darwinian theory, that life has been like a continual progression from the lower forms to the higher forms, which means we came from monkeys. If we can buy into the Darwinian thesis, we can exonerate the snake, emancipate the woman, and construct a more rational religion.
Wow.
What a state!
Exonerate the snake,
emancipate the woman, and construct a more rational religion. And this is a woman that's associated with women's suffrage in the first kind of wave of feminism. Now, there's going to be plenty of people that probably weren't as bad as her on the idea. But I'm almost positive we went to the Capitol building and there's Statuary Hall, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton is in. I think she's in the Capitol Dome. She might be in the actual Capitol Dome, in the various statues that are there. And there she is represented. So at any rate, I think you're at least seeing, say, a change in, of course, the way we're engaged in our politics at that time, right? So you used to have one vote per household, and at that moment, you now have two entities in a given household that are now both casting a vote, which is signaling something to us about the way that we're thinking. If you go back to I would point people to Johannes Althusius, wrote a book called Politica, like a Protestant political theorist. And the whole structure is basically you have these, I don't know, I don't think he calls them pre-political entities, but the idea is families are first. That's basically what he's thinking. And he talks about collegiums as well, but you have you have groups of people that are coming together to form this civil entity. You don't just have the pure individuals coming together. Okay, so which is interesting and very different than if you go back to. So let's go Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan. I think he's also 1600s, and he's in England, and he's the one who spoke of a state of nature. So you start with the state of nature. He infamously said it would be nasty, brutish, and short, is what Hobbes says. But in the state of nature, you and I are entirely free in every sense of the word. Mm-hmm. You have a right to everything in the state of nature. And this was conceived as like a real state. Okay. So
in other words, I can take that which is yours if I can. Is that part of that? And that I'm free to that?
At least.
Is that not a part
and
of
he might even say it's not even mine. Like, I don't know. He might go that far. The idea is like there is no marriage in the state of nature. Okay. And you have a right to everything in the state of nature. Okay. But it would be nasty, brutish, and short. And so because we can't do that unless we want the nasty, brutish, and short, we come together and we give up that right to everything as we consent to live in society. Okay. Now for Hobbes, it's so interesting because that's I'll talk about Locke in a minute, which is very Lockean, but Hobbes is before Locke. And Hobbes says, when you do that, you establish Leviathan. If you've seen, there's a picture, at least on the Penguin Classics version, it's kind of, I don't know who did it, but it's got the huge king. And then all the people, a bunch of little people make up Leviathan, the king. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea. You leave the state of nature, if you so choose, and you consent, but when you do, you hand it all over. And so for Hobbes, that the king was like everything. And he could administer the sacraments. He could, he could do it all. His word was the word. What I find interesting about that is the state of nature into society. So you're first not in it, and then you consent to be in it. And Locke picks up on that very same thing. Locke riffs on the state of nature. Maybe it's not quite as bad in Locke's as it would be in Hobbes, but you have the same kind of thing. It's you leave the state of nature by consent, and then you enter in. And so I went there to say you can hear the idea of like we feel that way. Americans feel that way. Like every individual, like not only has like the right to vote, at least in our common conception. Then we start to talk about all the people that can't vote that are still around here, and we don't quite know what to do about that. But to be a human, I mean, is to be able to vote because the idea of consent is so strong. I'm an individual and I'm supposed to consent, and you've lost the hierarchy, and you've lost the structure of the family that's going to be very present in the Protestant political theory idea. No, and I try to help students with this. So none of you selected dad and mom. Like, you didn't. Does anybody remember like pre-womb? You remember preconception where you like selected, I'll take that dad, I'll take that mom. And then you keep riffing on that. And the Lutheran tradition and any Paedo-Baptist tradition is also going to have the same concept and go, for the vast majority of you, you were born with your dad and mom, and you were born into the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, here you are. That it wasn't by consent, at least in many instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have the same thing with national identity. It's like,
do you think some of that plays into kind of is some of that philosophy applying to like the Anabaptist approach, or that would deny paedo-baptism? Is it like this kind of hyper focus on kind of the individual choice and expression versus, as you put it, because that's an argument that I'll often use too. It's like, well, did we choose for God to give us life? No. Well, why would we choose for God to call us into his church, to, place his name upon us, etc.?
Right. I do think that noting such an observation, at least noting the observation, is kind of undeniable. You go there, okay, there's something. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by the observation? I want to be careful here because I got tons of Baptist friends, and we're not trying to,
That's not the focus. But yeah, but I'm just wondering if there's as you said, an observation connection.
But it clicks, right? Like this idea that we're entirely outside until by consent that we are inside.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shift. That's the move. And this other paradigm says, okay, no, we can talk about the place of consent, and all for that. So I'm not for like arranged marriages,
mm-hmm.
But noticing that something came before that consent.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also just realities that you didn't consent to. And so I think the dad and mom thing is the easiest one to get, and then go, are dad and mom tyrants because there wasn't consent involved in their authority? You know what I mean? And the answer, I think people can get from that and go, yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think dad and mom are tyrants just because consent wasn't involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay. All right, so consent is not essential to escape tyranny. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like all consent. The lack of consent means automatic tyranny. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there's a lot to map there in where that particular political idea came up. But I can say with confidence that the Protestant political theory is going to be starting with when we do come together and have the formation of, say, a civil entity. It's not strictly individuals that are all kind of giving up certain liberties to create the social contract, mm-hmm. right, to enter in. No, it's kind of these, call them pre-political, call them smaller units of families and some natural relations that are coming together and forming it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is certainly lost in the American system. We are no longer thinking about the family as a political entity.
Mm.
Now, it still is, of course. So it's interesting. I mean, people get tax breaks for having kids and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get it fully stripped out,
mm-hmm.
but our structure doesn't. We don't really acknowledge it, at least in the way we used to.
So is there anything else kind of in this historical time frame that you think is important for us to have a grasp of, so that we can kind of get to that modern, what's going on today, and kind of identify how Christians should approach their relationship with the government, their relationship with politics today?
Yeah, I can't think of any others. I do think, I mean, we covered a lot of territory, but if you go to the 1600s and you look at Locke, look at Hobbes and Locke and what's going on with the state of nature, that was very helpful for understanding. And then Burke is right after them. So if you read Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France, I would highly recommend that to people, because Burke didn't like what was going on in France, and then you have to deal with the whole like American war for independence contrasted with what was going on in France. But you certainly had this autonomy, individualism, and a faulty notion of liberty that's operating in all of the chaos of the French Revolution. And Burke is saying things like, Hicksy kind of infamously said, we we are people of untaught feelings here. So he's writing this letter, and Burke's saying, we reject what's going on down there in France, and we are people of untaught feelings. We have prejudices, and we love our prejudices because they're prejudices. And you go like, what in the world? Like that. If kind of modern Americans want to run from anything right now, the conservatives are getting it. The conservatives are kind of like, yeah, what's that about? Tell me more. He's like, well, our fathers did this, and our fathers, we honor our fathers. Okay? But didn't your fathers do things wrong? Well, yes, they did. And so we're like, we won't do those things. But don't talk bad about our fathers. You know what I mean? Like that spirit of this is what we have done. And I, as an individual, did not have to come to this by reason alone. As he actually says, we would not entrust everything to every individual man's reason because we don't think that each man has enough of it. Yeah. It's like, okay, that's a very different structure than what was going on in France and what's going on in kind of modern American society. We think, these things, the place of tradition, that kind of being established. So Hobbes, Locke, and Burke would all be fun to read all throughout the 1600s there. And then Althusius' Politica, also there in the 1600s with Protestant political theory, like kind of full octane Protestant political theory. And then fast forward to the founding of the United States of America, those established churches, and then a long tradition of Christianity just being what we were and are. And I think you start to see that falter late 1800s, and then through the 1900s, you're seeing it slowly pull away. Blasphemy laws out in the 1950s, and then by the 1960s, you're dealing with the sexual revolution, second wave of feminism, and kind of a reordering of things. And then, of course, you kind of run up to now where we have conservatives that are starting to say, maybe we need, like, where do we go from here? How do we fix it?
Yeah, and to maybe highlight for those that might recoil at the word of like prejudice, right? So, well, if you love your son, you're certainly prejudiced against the lying habit that rises up in his life, right? Like being prejudiced means you are opposing that which harms what you love. You can't as a parent be non-prejudiced in all aspects of your child life without creating an absolute, destruction of a child, right? So there are things that we have to be prejudiced against. We have to be prejudiced against things that really harm society. And we still are. I mean, we don't completely yet be like, yeah, like pedophiles should, go do their thing. Right. Like you have to be prejudiced against some things. So,
right. Yeah. That's it. There's much to be said about that because you can be prejudiced against the wrong thing. Okay. So imagine like if everyone got prejudiced against all the redheads, you know what I mean? You say, well, you shouldn't do that because it doesn't warrant the prejudice. It doesn't warrant that instinctive reaction that says, no, we don't do that. And this is like a welcome to the world kid thing that I would go for. This is what happens like in any given classroom where if you walk into like a classical Christian school and you're like, the Jesus rose from the dead, and they're like, somebody's like, but what if he didn't? And he's like serious, like he's really trying. He's by his mood, by his question, he's trying to move the Overton window away from the resurrection. And but I have serious questions about it. What should the teacher do? Should you take that seriously, draw upon it, and talk it out? And we really need. You should all think this through. Or are you just going to be like, "What are you talking about? Jesus rose from the dead, and he rose from the dead." We don't have to. That's not one that has to be worked through reason alone. It's stemming from unbelief if it's real, right? If the interlocutor is genuine in his deal. And I'm not saying that you can't bring truths to bear upon his unbelief, but I'm saying that it's not man does not live by reason alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And there's something actually, there's a Christian prejudice in that. So I would say, like, why do you defend your mother? Is it because you ran the syllogism? Or it's like, no, don't talk about my mom. She's my mom. And for me to tell you that you need to you need to run the syllogism. And then after you run the syllogism, by kind of reason alone, your affections will, no, it doesn't. That's not it. Like that would be dishonoring to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It should be instinctive. There are certain things, and so to say that there are good prejudices is not to say that all prejudice is a good thing. Because that was a stupid prejudice. You were arrogant, you were prideful, whatever.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so let's identify today, right? So maybe I'll put it this way. So Christians today, what errors do we have as a church? Let's just say kind of the church in America. What kind of errors are we having when we approach politics, and what kind of framework should we be moving towards with all this history and as you said, like our fathers in the backdrop of this? How should we be thinking about this?
I think it starts in our homes. So you have to recover the nature of your home. So if the men listening, your wife is your body. You're the head, she's your body, and the children are the offspring of this particular union. And you got to remember like what was going. Really understanding what it is, what God did. So you got Matthew 19, what God has joined together, let man not put asunder. And just think about it for a minute. What God has joined together. Like he actually did that. For example, if you have Jack Thompson and Jill Williams about to get married, Jill Williams walks down the aisle, right? When the ceremony's over, the minister says, I now present to you for the very first time, Mr. and Mrs. Jack Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our individualism, we say, what? Did he forget her name? Did he, you know what I mean? Like, is he a rabid misogynist?
Mm-hmm.
No, the formal pronunciation at the end of the ceremony, which all of us have experienced, is rooted in this idea that God has made one new thing. The two shall become one flesh. He's made one thing in place of the two. Now, I'm not saying that Jack isn't still Jack and Jill isn't still Jill. You go to heaven by ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's still true. But I'm saying there's a new thing that exists called the Thompsons, and they really do exist. And even God deals with the Thompsons as the Thompsons. He deals with Jack, he deals with Jill, and he deals with the Thompsons. This is why Job can go and sacrifice for his children. So, are you allowed to do that? Like, is that even an acceptable practice? Like, Job is commended for this thing, not sacrificing for himself, but also for the kids. And this is the way God has made the world. He's actually wired up the world this way. And so I throw in the word covenant here. You have Malachi 2, where the men of Judah, it's a post-exilic prophet, the men of Judah have come out of exile. They've come back to Jerusalem, and they've married the daughters of a strange God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he said. And when God is rebuking them, he says, God will actually cut off the master and the scholar out of the tabernacles of Jacob if you do this, because you've forsaken the wife of thy covenant. Okay? So he actually grounds it in with this idea. And I would say we have become so kind of consent and individual rational. That has so dominated the way that we think that men aren't honoring their wives and blessing their wives the way that they should. Okay, and vice versa. Wives aren't respecting their husbands. We haven't talked about no-fault divorce, but it's just rabid. So no-fault divorce was before, of course, our most recent Obergefell. And where is that all coming from? Well, it's our sin and all that, but it's also judgment begins at the household of God. The church hasn't actually testified to what marriage is, that it is an actual bond that God himself has established. For example, if you and I entered into a business arrangement and you were going to sell me X number of tractors for Y amount of money, and then we leave that, I get gifted all the tractors I need by a rich uncle that gets out of the farming business, and your tractor manufacturing plant burns down the same night. You can't fill the order, and I don't need the order. Can we come together the next day, call it off, no harm, no foul, no sin? Of course.
Transactional.
It was transactional. It was a contract. Okay. Jack and Jill Thompson, second day of the honeymoon, they're in Hawaii, and Jack says, I was just thinking this isn't working out for me, and Jill comes to think of it. She's like, yeah, me too. I was thinking the same thing. Can they call it off? No harm, no foul, no sin. Every Christian knows, no, they can't. Okay. But why not? What's different? And you say, what's a covenant? Okay. What does that mean? It means the God of heaven condescended in that moment and through vows. God through the people. Same thing with politicals. God through the people made a thing that you can't separate.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, well, I thought it was voluntary. Like, we entered into the arrangement. Can't we enter out of the arrangement?
Mm.
No, you can't, because it's not the world you live in, right? That's Hobbes, Locke, in the political realm. Is the same way we're thinking about the marriage. But that's not what it is. So marriage is more than the product of the will of the parties involved. This is Americans are so transactional, so contracts abound, and therefore lawyers abound. We need to. Feudalism would be an interesting offshoot if you chase that, contrary to all the contractual arrangements. If everybody's tired of getting all the lawyers, their society's been structured in a different way in the past. But nevertheless, marriage is more than the product of the will of the parties involved. So yes, the vows are there, and the vows are real, but God is the one who joined them. God is the one who yoked them together. And therefore, when the children come, they're included, right? They're a part of the one thing. They're a part of that entity. And if we recover that, that's going to be essential. And it starts to show just how crazy, to tie this more to politics, would be Obergefell was. So when you say societally that this guy is married to this other guy, well, if you have the consent view, then they really are.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad, but they really are. And of course, I would say, but they're not. So what God joined together, let man not put asunder, doesn't apply to them.
God did not bring them together.
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
And you say, but let's say that Bob and Jim, they go to the same sanctuary. Jim walks where Jill walked, right? They say the same things, and they have the same minister that says, I now present to you, for the very first time, Bob so-and-so. But it didn't take. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. God doesn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because marriage is more than the product of the will of the parties involved. If it were pure consent and pure vow and no vertical line, then you would think, well, it worked, but it's bad. But we say, no, it just doesn't work at all. We reject it. We refuse it. And you say, who are you to stand against what the civil authorities have said? Well, again, the civil authorities are under God. They don't do this. I got a buddy that says, somebody asked, should we, as Christians, should we obey the bad laws and then work for reform to get the laws better? And my buddy replied, he's like, there's no such thing as a bad law. And the person was like, well, I mean, you know what I mean? He's like, no, there's just no such thing as a bad law. Bad laws don't exist. So, and he's kind of doing the same thing on law that I'm doing on the marriage.
Yeah.
He would say,
go ahead. Yeah.
Basically, if the civil magistrate says, hey, it's flu season, and so you all have to wear masks, on Tuesdays in the afternoons, we can just say no. And we don't have to repent of any sin. We don't have to say, Lord, forgive me for disobeying the magistrate. No, the law is not actually grounded. Right? It's not grounded. And therefore, it's no law at all. It doesn't exist, that kind of thing. So Obergefell, if we go back to Obergefell, once we say these two people are yoked, you have all sorts of downstream problems with children. And another case is Pavin v. Smith, came up out of Arkansas, Supreme Court case up out of Arkansas. Two women that were in a lesbian relationship after Obergefell. One woman conceives through artificial reproductive technologies. Mm-hmm. Okay, she's listed as mom, but Arkansas says we're not going to list your partner as a parent on the birth certificate.
Interesting.
Okay. But Arkansas had a statute that said if it were a heterosexual couple and the woman becomes pregnant through artificial reproductive technologies, her husband would be listed. And so it went up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, Arkansas, given Obergefell, you have to do it. So if you would do it for the heterosexual couple, you have to do it for these two ladies. Now, the weird thing is Arkansas's law, aside from the artificial reproductive technologies, so I'm against artificial reproductive technologies. But the law that would say your husband is listed is good because it's acknowledging that a real thing exists, a head and a body, right? And now that woman is pregnant. I'll ask students sometimes, if Jack and Jill Thompson get married and Jill, you get a head body, Jill gets pregnant, whose body is the baby in? And it clicks and they go, Jack's body. And I was like, yeah. And if you say that Dr. Longshore said men could get pregnant, I will reject it entirely. Right? But they're getting the concept. Right?
Yeah.
But that in our tradition, in our common law tradition, that's the way it always worked. You wouldn't even be classified as an illegitimate child. To be an illegitimate child was to be born outside of wedlock. But even in an adulterous encounter, where the woman committed adultery and is pregnant, her husband has the first rights of paternity. Like there's no let's go get the
biological father has no right to that child.
Let's go get the paternity test. We'll find out who the real dad is. Like, we know who dad is.
So are they actually coming to that conclusion based off of kind of like these theological principles that we're talking about?
I think so. I mean, people draw it out, but I know it's in the common law tradition. This is the way it operated. And I read that and read basically about the covenant family, like what God's doing in marriage. Like, yeah, that maps. Like that's exactly how it should be. And think about how good that would be for society. So if you have a guy that's sleeping around, and this would be true in a case of fornication, not adultery, so just two singles. Guy sleeps with a woman, gets her pregnant. The baby belongs to her. A woman is a home.
Yep.
So the baby belongs to her. He's going to have to pay for damages. He's done violence to her. He's going to have to pay for it all, and he can ask her dad and work, see if he can get married to her. But if he doesn't, he has to pay all the money with no say what it's done with it. Okay. And then in the case of adultery, right, the adulterating male, what we say to him is, when you're sleeping around, so you want your seed to call somebody else daddy. Men don't like that.
Yeah.
Right. I saw Andrew Tate recently. I almost popped off on this on Twitter, and I thought, I'm just gonna leave it alone. I saw him on Twitter say something about marriage is horrible. I have, a bunch of babies. I got a bunch of babies, all these women, and I got no marriage.
He's like bragging about it.
He's bragging about it. Like this is it, because I'm not bound by marriage, and I've got all these kids that I can now take care of. Nobody can take them from me. And I was gonna say it's gonna be tough when he finds out that they're not his kids.
Yeah,
like none of them. Just all of that's wiped out. Like they all belong to the woman, and they'll call another man daddy when she gets married to another man, right? Men don't like that. There's a Netflix documentary out called "The Man with 1,000 Kids." This guy's donating all these sperm banks. He's got kids everywhere. And he really talks about trying to be with them and help them. It's like chaos.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, but they're not yours. So this is a recovery of marriage, and it's going to start by Christian men and women saying, "Oh, we get it. My duties to my wife and children are fundamental to reality itself." So when a guy is straying, when a guy is failing as a father, we should draw upon the fact that he made a vow. You say, you made a vow, and you should keep your vow. That's good, manly, moral. But we can add to that, say, you hate yourself? Yourself? You hate yourself? Because that's because it's you. He who loves his wife loves his own body. But really, it wasn't pure metaphor. Or, it was this is real. God, you're ripping the very fabric of reality. You are destroying yourself because God actually made it, right? And we need to feel something of the lack of ultimacy. I'm within a system and a structure that God himself has placed me in. And he's good, and I'm going to trust him and obey all the way down, something like that.
What I love about that is just how, right, so you look at the chaos, right, and you just put together two things, I think, but if those two things actually took place, right, take away this no-fault divorce, one, And then 2, you've got this understanding of, yeah, you can't enter into somebody else's household and then plant a child and then claim that child as your own, or, you know, the whole Andrew Tate thing, right? But I mean, that would heal very quickly immense issues that are plaguing our society now. I mean, you just think of, I mean, it's the most chaotic structure for kids, and that they can be like growing up, and then they've got to go with mom, and then whoever mom like married after the divorce, and then dad's got this other household, and they're bouncing around, or you know, it's just, there's so many just detrimental situations where you're looking at those kids and you're like, you know, I hope God works through his Holy Spirit and helps heal the situation. But I can see where that trajectory is going, and I can see what it's going to happen in 15 years when this guy's 18, 19, 20, and then he's going to do these. It's just absolute chaos, right? But just putting some order back under God's sovereignty, and then just watching what happens when you just put it's no longer dislocated, and then you can watch things work as they're supposed to.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, this is a huge deal because you have so illegitimate children. In the book of Hebrews, KJV says you're not bastards but sons. Bastards, illegitimate children. You go, what is that? You know, we've almost like, we have so many illegitimate. I'll give you a stat in a moment, but we have so many that we don't actually know even what the word means anymore. It meant to be born out of wedlock. So again, if you're born in wedlock, even if it's an adulterous situation, that's not like textbook illegitimacy. Illegitimacy is born out of wedlock. That's what it was. Now, I think, see if I can get the stats close, 1950s, it was low. It was like 5% of Americans. And I think it's at 40 to 50% of Americans are born out of wedlock now.
Wow.
It's insane. Okay, so no-fault divorce was kind of like first to hit. And as that hits, we're dealing with a massive, so this difficulty, this very visceral problem that so many people are going through, who do I belong to, is happening at the rate of 40% of the nation is now dealing with this problem that you're talking about. And I'm not saying that if we restructured society according to this kind of covenantal idea that all of that goes away. You have a very weird, we have a very difficult situation where if you have an adulterous encounter, right, for the woman commits adultery, and let's say that her husband says, I'm not going to put her away, I believe he would have grounds to do so. I think adultery is grounds for divorce and remarriage. But if he doesn't, and he says, and I'll take care of this kid as if he's my own, that kid's going to grow up, and depending on what happens with natural dad, there's still going to be that reality, right? Nature. So you don't fix sin with good law.
Yeah,
That's like just a classic.
Yeah.
You don't fix sin with good law, but you can make things worse with bad law, which is what we've been doing. Right. So the key is, but what the good law would do is put pressure, as we hear about, like in Paul's letters to Timothy. It would put pressure, and we would go in with our eyes wide open of what's going on, right? Of why we don't do that kind of thing. Yeah. Because, I can leave it at there.
Do you have, is 12:30 a firm endpoint for you?
Yeah, I need to pop out then.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got about 12 minutes left. So I'll give you kind of two options. We can either stick with the political, or if you just want to kind of talk even about how Christians should orient their voice in the broader culture. Which would you rather tackle?
We can go voice if you want.
Okay. Yeah. How should Christians orient their voice in culture around us?
Okay, let's do that. All right. Was that you pitching the question?
That was the question.
Hit it one more time. I'll go back to it.
Yeah. So, people often struggle with how do we as Christians kind of engage the world around us? And niceness is a kind of a term that often gets thrown around. And we were talking with Rigney about the sin of empathy and how that plays out. But what should we be recovering as a Christian church facing all of this chaos around us, both in the political realm, in the cultural realm, in the spiritual realm? What should we be doing? Yeah,
I think the best way to answer that would be to talk about Moscow itself. So we're here in Moscow, Idaho. I came here 4 years ago from Florida. I did COVID in Florida. DeSantis was far better than,
New Hampshire, where I was at the time.
Pretty much everywhere else. And so conservative in Florida, all that kind of stuff. I moved to Moscow. You've got 25,000 people in the town. You have University of Idaho here. It's a blue dot in a red state. And what's happening, and what has happened now for 40 plus years, is a public Christianity. And you could call it an objective Christianity. And so when it comes to, I think this is a long way of answering your question. The biggest problem with, like, people think, well, I'm not political. Well, I want to say, if by that you mean you don't jump on Twitter and pop off about the latest CNN problem, fine. I know that's not what I would recommend. No, what I wanted to say is we're all political creatures, okay? Because you live in the polis. You live with people, and your Christianity is supposed to be worn on the outside as much as it is on the inside. So it's supposed to be inside and outside. It's not outside bad, inside good. No. It's if you're only it on the outside and the inside's full of dead men's bones and you're the Pharisees and you have a problem. But inside and outside, most of our American Christian problem is we want it inside but not outside. Because when you do it outside is when the conflict's going to come. So, I mean, we get so used to getting heat that you don't even really feel it anymore. I mean, my kids, I have 5 neighbors, 4 of whom have rainbow yard signs. Right around the corner from me is some guy that has like a big sign on his front fence that says, Christ Church is horrible, blah, 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 like all this stuff. They like walk by it and see it all the time. Hi, good to see you. We throw parties and give people that are protesting like meat and cupcakes and stuff. You know what I mean? But the first time can be a thing. Like, I just got actual flack, like real, like this guy doesn't like me, or this girl doesn't like me, or these people said bad things about me. That's when you know you're doing something right. That's when you may be doing something right. You could always, people could say you're an idiot because you're really being an idiot. You don't want to do that. But that experience of engaged in the city, in the town, is what we're really talking about, which is much harder than you just being up to speed on like the latest Fox News thing or the latest news that came, and being kind of culturally engaged, or listening to the latest podcast on cultural affairs. That's all good, but I'm saying actually doing something. You're supposed to do something, which is going to be building institutions, classical Christian schools. It's going to mean like public psalm sings. Like, let's go downtown and sing a psalm. You might think that's weird. Don't do it in a bad way. Don't annoy people that are like eating dinner. But we have a nice little public square. It's a big area and stuff's always happening there. We'll go down there and sing a song, or coach that football team and get to know the people, get to know the other parents that are around you, and really do them some kind of tangible good. Right? Be a businessman that is successful, that is then generous in investing in all of the kind of good things that are going on. All of that stuff is political. Or then, get into the city council meetings and know what's going on there at that level. Or write an opinion piece for the local newspaper, or out there in the world of social media, and address this. If you're going to have people called to all different kind of pockets and different things. But I would say a key in for the men, like vocational men, be they white collar, blue collar, is realize that people know where you live. You know what I mean? Like, there's a conservative guy that's like, Nick, I'm going to keep all my stuff off the internet. It's like, well, good. I mean, do your best.
Yeah.
But like, no, but your family is a public entity. Your children represent you when they go to school and when they're at the sports fields, everywhere they go. And know your neighbors and impact them. Like, actually, it's going to be, there's a peculiar blessing that is present here, and that's what creates when you get a cluster of saints living that way. That's what throws the world, the secularists. Like, they don't understand it, and it's all it is Christendom. All it is the kingdom of God, like actually present. But they're not used to it. They're not used to like Christians doing business selling goods, establishing, real estate, all of that stuff, and then publicly being Christian and having an opinion about what's best for the society. And so, yeah, you're going to have courage and have those conversations. Be reasonable. Don't be a jerk. But when it comes to conflict, the reason that you're in the conflict is because you love what's behind you. And you really do have something to protect, something you want to see the Lord grow. You have this garden growing, this culture growing, this generation of saints, little saints kind of coming up behind you. And therefore, you are publicly Christian in all that you do everywhere you go.
You've obviously gotten pushback from the secular side. What kind of pushback have you gotten from within Christianity?
Yeah, I could go a couple different ways there. You have kind of the pushback from Christianity on the internet. And then you can have, like, say, conservatives in the town that appreciate you but aren't quite sure what to do with it. You know what I mean? Like those kind of people, which is great because it's like that would, I'm very familiar with that in my previous ministry and life in Florida. I know those people well. They're people that probably go to church. Some of them might not. They're conservatives, and they're just not quite sure about it. But they kind of like you. The guys like you. The guys are like, something's going on there. Something healthy. I want to get in on that. But the difficulty with that group is going to be they still want to live in positive world or neutral world. If you take Aaron Rinn's positive, neutral, negative world paradigm, that's really what they want, where you can just kind of be vanilla, maybe kind of Christian, but not like explicitly Christian, but just like kind of.
Aaron Rinn, he's in Indianapolis. Is that right?
He might be.
Yeah.
I can't remember where Rinn is.
Josh was just talking about him on the ride up.
Yeah.
He's like, you need to get this guy on too. So that's,
Rinn would be a great, we had him out for NSA maybe last year, I think. So that's those people. I think on the internet, you're going to have like the soft evangelical left that has always had issue. We just had Russell Moore, obviously, very recently. I don't know if you know, Christianity Today, say all kinds of naughty things about us.
What did he say?
Oh, my goodness. I think he said, we're losers. That's what he said. He said we're losers. I think he might have said satanic.
Really?
Yeah. So this is the classic. This is where, if you can find this, if people go look, it's on Canon, it's on the YouTube Canon. But when he did all of that, Canon produced a great response that just had Russell saying they're losers. And actually kind of made him shrink every time he said it. And then it just showed all of the parties and all of the good things, like a bunch of people celebrating, and films that have been produced here and books that have been produced here, and people having a great time, dads being good dads, and everybody having a great time, which is a perfect way. Like this, that would I really don't know any, say, entity that does that one better. When you really start to be engaged in some kind of objective fashion, and that you're not going to flinch, like you haven't sinned. I've just said true things.
Yeah,
I said true things in Ephesus. Jesus tells us exactly what to do: rejoice and be glad, for so they persecuted the prophets that were before you. Like you are supposed to throw a party. You are supposed to have a really good time. You must have a good time right now. You are commanded to have a good time right now. And if you cultivate that, man, it's potent. Because when in any pocket, in any society, when Christians really start to go, like we're going to do it this way. This is the way God wants us to do it. You're going to get that heat, and it'll be heat. Like it will be difficult. They'll come at you sideways. They'll come for your wife. They're going to try to say things there. They'll come for your kids, and you just have to have big faith in the moment. Be like laugh at it. Be like, oh yeah, this is it's exactly what they did to Paul and Peter and all of the others.
Well said. Well, that's a good place to close. Dr. Jared Longshore, I appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate you taking the time with us.
Yeah. Been great to be with you.
Yeah. God bless and cheers.